Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Inside Dfinity. Today I want to talk about a topic that makes Dfinity different from most other existing blockchain systems, and what I want to talk about is governance. I'm sure you've heard multiple terms here. In general, there's two types of governance systems, on-chain and off-chain governance systems that various blockchain protocols use. Before we dive into the specifics, why is it important? If you look at a blockchain ecosystem, you will notice that there's different actors. There's miners, there's users, there's developers, and probably a whole bunch of other categories in which stakeholders or participants in this ecosystem can be defined. And why is it important? Because all of these different actors potentially have different interests. For example, when we look at the Bitcoin network, the users which want to make transactions and move Bitcoins around, historically they've had an interest in bigger block sizes because it would allow them to have cheaper transaction fees and would also allow them to have faster transactions because more data will fit into one block. Off-chain governance systems, what's most widely used in the platforms that are already live. For example, Bitcoin. Let's say in Bitcoin, the miners have an interest to keep the block size as it is because it means they can stick to the current hardware, they don't need to upgrade any clients. While on the other hand, you have users who want to make transactions and have an interest that these transactions are as cheap as possible and as fast as possible, which would speak for an upgrade of the block size. So how do these groups come to an agreement? With off-chain governance systems, what happens is that users, developers, and miners, they all meet in some off-chain property. It could be Reddit, a Telegram group, a Slack channel, or even an offline meeting at a conference. They discuss solutions and they try to come to an agreement. And once enough people come to an agreement, an update is released. It is hoped that enough people adopt it for the network to fully upgrade to that new release. So for Bitcoin, the off-chain governance system historically has proven to be very difficult. There's been multiple proposals of upgrading block size and other changes to parameters that have not been able to be processed and released because the network could not agree on one solution. Even worse, another platform that uses an off-chain governance system is Ethereum. If you remember, about 2 years ago is when the DAO happened. And if you remember what the DAO was, it was basically a distributed venture capital fund that would raise money via an ICO and then channel those funds into various companies based on decisions that people made on the chain. Now, while the DAO on paper was very successful raising money, I think it raised about $150 million at the time, which now will be worth much more. Unfortunately, someone hacked the system and got away with about $50 million, so about 1/3 of all the money that was raised as part of the DAO. There was an issue in how the smart contract that governed the DAO ICO was written, and so someone was able to steal about 1/3 of all the funds. So what happened? So the community was split. Some people thought that the money that was stolen as part of the DAO hack should be returned. There should be a hard fork that reverses that transaction. On the other hand, there was a big part of the community that said blockchain should be immutable. That's one of its most valued qualities, and that's why we should never mess with the immutability of a blockchain. So what happened? So Vitalik listened to both sides of the community and then decided that even though code is law, in this case, the end justified the means, and he decided to release an update that he asked everyone to adopt, where those $50 million were returned to the DAO. Unfortunately, not everyone followed Vitalik's recommendation. So there was quite a big part of the community that did not agree with the hard fork, or they just not want to go through the trouble of updating, or whatever the reasons were. But a large portion of the community stayed with what's now called ETH Classic. ETC is the symbol. And so the chain split into two. There was a hard fork. Of course, that's not something you want to happen to your network because it creates a lot of insecurity and instability. Because are both coins together now worth what was one coin before, or is one chain going to be completely useless and the other chain is going to be worth a lot? How do you deal with such a situation? There's a lot of insecurity, so technically you don't want that to happen in a network that a lot of users and companies are going to be using. So before we move on, a term that I've used a lot now is fork. And there's generally two types of forks. There's hard forks and soft forks. A fork basically means that until a certain point, the chain was one, and then there's a release that is adopted by only part of the network, and suddenly the chain splits into two. In the case of a hard fork, that means that the two ends of the fork are not compatible with each other. The upgrade is so substantial that one is not compatible with the other, that clients who do not upgrade cannot follow the new your chain. A soft fork, on the other hand, is an upgrade that introduces new features to a block or the way data is processed in a way that's backward compatible. All clients, meaning clients that have not yet upgraded, can still participate in the network and can still follow the chain and build new blocks, although they're going to be missing out on some features. With that, we now know that off-chain governance is probably not an ideal solution because it leads to soft and hard forks, which are hard to manage and generally lead to a fragmented network. So what's a potential solution? Now, you might already guess it. If these systems where governance is handled in properties somewhere else on the web but not on the chain are called off-chain, then the alternative is called on-chain. What that means is that your blockchain brings built-in mechanisms for you to make decisions, for the community to make decisions, and for the community to govern itself. If the blockchain allows you to make decisions on the chain, it means the clients can also update themselves. A release can be rolled out to all the clients that are currently connected to the network, which makes it much faster for you to upgrade and also prohibits from diverting into different forks. In a way, if you look at this, it's a bit like when the iPhone came out, and at the beginning you had to always manually go and download the software, and it was a complicated process to upgrade it, and some people chose not to upgrade because they liked certain features and they didn't like how those features were changed in newer versions. So in a sense, on-chain governance is like an auto update. When your computer automatically or your phone automatically downloads security updates, it might just prompt you for if you wanted to stop it, generally just executes them and automatically adapts new updates and upgrades. So now to the interesting part. How does DFINITY solve this? How does DFINITY handle on-chain governance? DFINITY is one of the few systems that are coming out that has a very promising idea for how on-chain governance can work. And DFINITY does this by something that we call the Blockchain Nervous System, BNS. The Blockchain Nervous System is the built-in governance protocol that DFINITY will ship with all its clients to all its users, all its miners, everyone who participates in the network. We're going to use a different episode to dive into the specifics of how the blockchain nervous system works, but in general, the way you can imagine it is this. You can submit proposals to the blockchain nervous system and you stake them, meaning you put some money down to say that you're very serious about these proposals. Now, everyone who wants to vote on proposals also stakes some money, and in return they get neurons. What we call neurons, they're kind of like voting tokens right now. And then you can use those neurons and voting tokens to make decisions. And what's so clever about it is that you can delegate your votes. So you can delegate your vote to someone who you know is more to date, or maybe you're going on vacation. You want to vote in a similar way as one of your colleagues does, then you can just set your neurons to follow that colleague's votes and it will vote for you. So just to sum this up real quick, there's on-chain and off-chain governance. Off-chain governance has a few problems. Most notably, it's hard to come to one decision as the whole community and then make the whole community adapt that. That often leads to forks, and forks are bad because it fragments the network. It means the network loses value, or at least there's a lot of insecurity. There's two types of forks. Hard forks, which mean that clients who do not upgrade can now participate in new blocks or wouldn't understand new blocks, and soft forks where clients who do not upgrade can still follow new blocks, but they might not be able to create them or they're missing out on some crucial features. That's why DFINITY is building in a governance protocol into its blockchain. We're using an on-chain governance system. In the case of DFINITY, it's called the blockchain nervous system. The blockchain nervous system works by getting some neurons and then either directly voting on proposals or delegating your votes and your neurons to follow some of your colleagues, friends, or anyone that you want to follow. With that, I hope that gave you some insights onto what we're planning with DFINITY in regards to on-chain governance. And now I'm going to enjoy one of the big benefits that I have living right here on the Lake of Zurich. I'm going to go wakeboarding. And with that, I just want to say we're also hiring. We're opening an office right here in Zurich. So if you also want to be in an environment where you work with extremely smart people, work on a cool project, and also have the benefit that every now and then you might be able to go water skiing or wakeboarding on a Friday evening, head over to dfinity.org/jobs. And with that, I'll see you soon.